Kelsey, we're going to be talking about how to incorporate art into fourth grade curriculum, and we're going to start with social studies. And the painting that I chose is Sandia, Loma Scarza, and I will include a copy of this with my post so you guys can see it better. After I introduce the painting, I'll tell a little bit about the background of the artist. She was a Mexican-American civil rights advocate, so a lot of her paintings represent the lives of Mexican Americans. So since she was an advocate for civil rights, we can connect this to previous civil rights leaders that we've learned about in the women's suffrage movement and abolitionist movement. And this meets the standards of us being able to discuss contributions and challenges faced by civil rights leaders such as Susan B. Anthony, Frederick Douglass, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, and Harriet Tubman. So for this activity, students will be asked to complete a worksheet in which they identify the ways their lives would be different without these movements or leaders. So in this category, they can write how it would be different without the women's suffrage movement and how it would be different without the abolitionist movement. So an example could be the girls in the class might not be able to vote when they get older, and even that schools can still be segregated, and the children in the class now might not even be in the class today if we didn't have those leaders. And so the assessment tool I would use for this is just that they were able to complete the worksheet and we discussed it as a class afterwards. So moving on to language arts, I would open up the language arts lesson by giving the students a worksheet with 3 aesthetic questions. So the first one being, what does the painting remind you of? Could you create a new title for the artwork? And list some adjectives to describe the artwork. So in the painting, the family is spending time together, so we're going to discuss that. And the students will be asked to write a narrative on this sheet of paper about 3 to 5 sentences about their favorite memory with their own family. And this could be anything they want. It could be a vacation or just anything. But the narrative should include 2 objectives and 2 verbs. And the standards that this meets is students will write narratives to develop real or imagined experiences or events using effective technique, descriptive details, and clear event sequences. So I would use a checklist to assess this and just to make sure that the student has, number 1, written the narrative and has included 2 objectives and 2 verbs. So moving on to the math and art project, I'll open up the lesson by asking the students if they can identify any types of angles or lines that we previously learned about, and they should be able to identify right angles in the doors and windows of the painting and the parallel lines along the side of the house. For the art project, students will be asked to sketch and draw a picture of their own house. So they will be given a blank sheet of paper, and they will draw and sketch a picture of their own house, but the sketch should include acute, obtuse, and right angles, as well as parallel and perpendicular lines. And the math standard that this meets is draw points, lines, rays, angles, and parallel and perpendicular lines, and be able to identify these in 2-dimensional figures. And the art standard that this connects with is number 10, synthesize and relate knowledge and personal experiences to make art. Students will need markers, colored pencils, crayons, and rulers for this project to be able to sketch it. And I would use a rubric for this with a maximum of 8 points. Students should include the parallel and perpendicular lines as well as the different types of angles in their sketch. And then lastly, we have science and art criticism. I would introduce the lesson by giving the students a worksheet with 4 art criticism questions. Number 1 being, describe what you see in the painting. How does the artist communicate the time of day? Do you see anything we could connect to science? And what is the story behind this painting? So in the painting, the students should be able to identify that we can connect this to science because there is a moon in the picture in this left corner. Sorry, this is backwards, but up in the corner. And so the standard we are focusing for this lesson is obtain, evaluate, and communicate information to model the effects of the position and motion of the Earth and the Moon in relation to the Sun as observed from the Earth. So in this lesson, students will be able to identify the different phases of the Moon and they will create a Phases of the Moon foldable to remember them. So I've created one myself, and it's just a plain sheet of 8 by 11 paper, folded in half, and then cut 8 ways for each of the moon phases. So they could start by doing the new moon, which is the first phase. They open it up and they see that it's the first phase and that the sun is covering the moon, so we can actually hardly see it. And so I drew a circle. And then for the waxing crescent, which is the second phase, the sun has moved out a little bit, so we see part of the moon, which is how the moon is in the painting. And so the assessment I would use for this is an observation, just making sure that the students has created the foldable and accurately match the phases of the moon with how the moon looks, and just have them all in order. So thank you guys. I hope you enjoyed this lesson.